Hello there, my name is Tuomas. Welcome to Sound Free. It's been a while. I didn't intend to take a summer break this long, but a lot of things has happened in my life. A few days ago I was supposed to continue doing videos for you guys too, but what happened, I came from work and the roof was leaking. I have this sort of work studio right over there, and the roof was leaking, and so there was like water draining and dripping all over, like, you know, the song Drip Drop. It was like kind of like that. Water was just dripping on my computer stuff, my papers, my printers and stuff. So I had to move everything from that room over here to the living room, to this area especially. So it's just been so much mess and stuff going on in my life. I've been super busy, mostly positive, for positive reasons, but also a little bit of these sort of hassles, these negative things as well. But so far so good. We are still alive and kicking, and I'm still continuing my Beach Boys album review series. And now we have come to Holland. Holland is the, I believe, 19th studio album. Man, they were busy in the 60s and early 70s. It's crazy. They had only been releasing studio albums for 10 years or so around this time period, and already at their 19th. That's crazy. It was released January 8th of 1973, and this album is a dear favorite. Dear tree. And it's a dear favorite of mine. I think this might be my favorite Beach Boys album. I know I say this quite a lot, but with this one I really mean it. This one is a spectacular album, so I wish that someday somebody would dive into this a bit more, and, you know, the story of Holland would be told for the, you know, public audiences as well. So anyway, after Car and the Passions album sold quite poorly. By the way, I reviewed that in my last review, so check that out. I love that album as well, but anyway, that sold poorly, but they still continued with Jack Rieley, who was their new manager, a guy that managed them. He was more than a manager, but he was their manager in the early 70s, basically from Sirs up until this one. But he was much more than just a manager. He was a creative partner. He was a songwriting collaborator especially with the Wilsons, and he affected the Beach Boys style and the whole direction of the group and the music so much. And I see Holland being sort of his times or his 10 years crowning achievement. And a lot of people consider Holland to be the last great album by the Beach Boys in general. So, you know, it's if you compare this to Sunflower, which a lot of people, probably most of the Beach Boys fans, say is the greatest Beach Boys album next to Pet Sounds, and the greatest group effort that they put out. This one, I feel, is... I don't want to say this, I love Sunflower, but I feel Holland is so much better than Sunflower as a whole. But anyway, that's another topic. But, you know, it's very similar in a lot of ways to Sunflower. The group is working as a whole, really. Everybody is writing songs and collaborating, and, you know, everybody's playing a lot of instruments on this one, so it's mostly the Beach Boys themselves. There are some session musicians too, but most of it, like I'd say like 90% of the instrumentation is by the group themselves. So that's once again one of those myths that they never played on their own records. It's debunked on this album and many others too. But, you know, anyway, they decided in the early 70s they were not so much loved in the States. Their records didn't sell and people didn't really attend to their shows. But when they got to tour in Europe, especially in like Holland and you know, UK, they witnessed that people really love us here. The shows were packed and people loved to hear the new songs, and people bought their albums, the new albums and stuff. You know, the singles peaked a lot higher in Europe a lot of times even at spots like number one. Anyway, like top 10 hits. They had a lot of top 10 hits in Europe in the late 60s and early 70s. Songs that did not chart at all in US. So they just fell in love with the idea. It was probably mostly Jack's idea, but the idea of going to Europe and record their new album over there, write and record it over there. And for whatever reasons, they decided that Holland was the place to go. And first, the idea was to find an existing studio and record there, but they couldn't. I believe the story goes that they couldn't really find one that they could just book for months. So they ended up dismantling Brian's home studio and shipping all that stuff there. The engineer that was working with them, Steve Moffat, had to build sort of portable mixing desk and a lot of fancy gear, and it was a super expensive and a very tough task to succeed in. But they did it, and they shipped all that junk to Holland, and they found a barn that already had some sort of recording studio. But anyway, they ended up like building their own on top of that, and it was like right next to a cow pasture, and you know there were cows, and I believe there was like a railroad right next by, and they had to stop recording every, like, I don't know, once in 20 minutes or 30 minutes because the train would go by, and like it was crazy. And can you think about a documentary about that? Like, man, if they had that idea and financing to produce and film that project back in that day, it would have been truly amazing to see that as a documentary. Because can you just imagine them waking up in their, you know, homes around Amsterdam and then driving to this barn and going through the songs, and you know, you got obviously got Ricky Fataar and Blondie Chaplin there as well, and sometimes Brian would drop in, but he didn't. He mostly worked on Funky Pretty and his Mount Vernon and Farewell or Fairway sort of suite, this sort of fairy tale thing. But he didn't really that often collaborate with the other members on their songs. But anyway, he was there around here and there. Dennis was mostly absent. He, instead of living in Holland, he went to Canary Islands, and I guess probably because of the beaches and surfing and stuff, so he probably surfed there and drank. And then sometimes he would fly to Holland and record something, mostly his own songs. But yeah. Anyway, they ended up spending weeks, I believe a few months at least, in Holland in recording this. But they flew back to Los Angeles to finish it up then. So they didn't finish the whole product there. They finished it back home in Los Angeles. And they ended up actually recording and adding Sail on Sailor on a later date to this album, because the record company didn't accept the first offered version of it, which included We Got Love, which is a track I love, by the way. But the studio version that they had, it's a song by Blondie and Ricky. I love that track, but the studio version that they had recorded is a lackluster, so, you know, I completely understand the reasoning behind not including that one. I love the live version, but the studio version is not that great. Love the song though. But anyway, in this one we're not gonna dive into the unreleased tracks and the outtakes, because there are dozens of them, and you know, someday I'll probably do separate videos about talking about all that stuff that was left out of these albums, but that's not really what we're talking about here today. We are just talking about what was included. So anyway, what ended up happening, they released the album, and by the way, I love the album cover. It's taken in, I believe, in Amsterdam, in a canal, and you know, it's an upside down photograph. It's very moody, murky, and overall the idea behind it and the graphic design and this reflection and this sort of thing over here, that font and everything, I love it. It's one of my favorite Beach Boys album covers. But anyway, the album charted okay, like it sold okay. It wasn't bad, it was an upgrade for Caught in the Passion's but I believe it didn't do as well as Surf's Up. But anyway, it still sold good. Like, it didn't do phenomenal, but it was alright. It probably was a financial disaster anyway, because it was so expensive to flew all that gear and all the members and their families to Holland, and that whole expedition, it cost, I believe, almost $2 million in today's money. So it was very expensive. But anyway, especially in Europe, it sold quite well, this album. And it's probably one of the most often, like if I go to a second-hand store, it's probably one of the most often seen Beach Boys studio albums that I see in Europe over here. So, not that often, but sometimes. So anyway, it sold pretty well in Europe. Who figures? But anyway, the back cover looks like this, and I love it. I love the cow over there. I believe this might even be the cow pasture that was next to the studio, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it's black and white, and you got cool pictures of the guys. Everybody looks super cool. Brian looks kind of angry, but yeah, you got a little bit of information here how it was recorded, and it's kind of interesting how they showcase over here. This is the first time they've done anything like this, that they showcase everybody's contributions as songwriters. But let's now dive into the track list itself. The album kicks off with Sail on Sailor, which probably is the greatest album opener that they ever had. It just kicks ass. It's so great. And this track is interesting because the first time I listened to this album, sort of my take was that Sail on Sailor, I knew that it was the most well-known. I probably had heard it a few times already, but I found it to be the most boring track on the album. I was like, yeah, like, why do they keep playing this live even until today? Because it's kind of like the most boring track on this album. But anyway, it just took me some time to appreciate it, because it's the groove of that one is very repetitive. It doesn't really change at all. It's sort of bluesy rocker, and the lyrics are kind of like the melody and the whole thing. It's not that complicated, compared to a lot of Beach Boys songs. Usually, the whole songwriting structure, the whole structure of the song and the mood of it is very sort of unusual for the Beach Boys, and I found it to be sort of boring back in the day. Not today anymore. It took me some time to truly appreciate it, and these days I really love it. I liked it back then too, but I just felt like it was kind of just, I don't know, lackluster or something. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, the song itself is super cool, and I especially love the way it's produced, and that whole instrumentation has those synth parts, or I think Carl plays most of the instrumentation on it, and there's cool key parts. There are these, I think it's like some sort of electric piano that Carl plays over there, and the guitar work on it, and Blondie's soulful singing, and the lyrics that are sort of a collaboration with, I believe, Van Dyke Parks and Jack Rieley, and then Brian's friends Tandin Ulmer and, was it Ray Kennedy? I think so. I think it's Ray, but anyway, Kennedy, anyway. They collaborated with a few words or so, but I believe the song itself is mostly written by Brian Van Dyke and Jack Rieley. And you can kind of hear both Van Dyke's and Jack Rieley's influence or work on the lyrics, because it kind of sounds like both of them. And I find it very interesting how Brian's opinion on this song has changed throughout the years multiple times. I believe like 15 years ago he kept on saying that he doesn't want to even sing that song, and it's the one song that he doesn't like at all that he wrote. But then lately, like in the Long Promised Road documentary, and like later years, he's been saying a lot of times that it's one of his favorite songs, and he truly loved being in Holland and the whole project. He really loved it and stuff like that. And it's very interesting because a lot of times it's said that Brian did not like to make that trip at all. So anyway, But anyway, it's just a groovy track. I love it. Works great as an opener, and it should have been a smash hit. I don't know why it wasn't a bigger hit. It was a minor hit. It was the first single released on the album, but it should have been a smash hit because it's phenomenal. The second track is Steamboat, and it was written by Dennis, the music, and the lyrics were written by Jack Rieley. It's about Robert Fulton, a guy that invented the steamboat. And this song is one of my favorites, like, you know, from the whole discography of the Beach Boys. I think it's up there with tracks like Cabin Essence and, you know, some of those Americana style tracks from Smile. I don't know what it is about this song. It is so unusual. Even for Dennis, it just has a sort of vibe, and that might have something to do with Jack Rieley's influence, but that whole subject matter is very unusual for a Dennis song. But I love the lyrics, I love the way Carl mostly sings it, but I believe Dennis is doing the bass vocal part, which is my favorite. In the left, if you listen to it with headphones or a stereo system, you hear him on the left doing the do 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 thing. It's so cool. It kind of could be, that's usually the part that Mike sings, but I'm pretty sure that it's Dennis actually singing it. I think Mike sings the lower notes at the very end of the track, so he has a very sort of a different sound in his voice or style. But anyway, so it has that sort of doo-wop thing going on, even though it's sort of psychedelic, sort of progressive song, sort of an Americana song, sort of this rootsy thing. It's very just interesting and strange song, and I love it how it sort of starts this sort of adventure that this album is. And it also could have been the opener, so I could really imagine that being the opener, and then we'd have Sail On Sailor. That would work really well as well, so you could even flip those two. But anyway, just an extremely strong opening. And the third track is Big Sur, and that is the first track on the California Saga thing, which is probably the most sort of cohesively artistic thing Mike and Al did. So it's just all over the whole thing. The three songs sort of suite is just such a neat artistic experience. I don't really know how to put that into words, but you get Big Sur is kind of Big Sur. Okay, maybe Big Sur and the last song California, you can sort of separate those, but I think the whole thing works best when you just listen it fully. So, and Beaks of Eagles, you cannot really listen to that separately at all. It's not really a song, it's sort of a segue in between these tracks, and it sort of bounce everything together. But anyway, Big Sur is the greatest track that Mike Love wrote, both the lyrics and the music himself. I think he had written this in like 69 or something like that. He had this old Martin guitar, he told this story, and he sort of came up with the chords and the melody and the lyrics, dreaming about the area of Big Sur and how he'd like to grow his family, raise his kids there, and, you know, grow a family over there and stuff like that. Though his son Christian Love was anyway, he told, and I cannot remember which podcast or video this was, but just very lately he told in an interview that he doesn't think that Mike was able to actually come up with those chords by himself, that he should have needed, he probably had some help by other musicians. But I don't know how that story actually goes, but that's what Christian said. But Mike has said that he actually came up with the chords himself, but who knows. Anyway, he's the only credited songwriter on this song, and the song itself is so pretty, and I think this is a hot debate, but I think the Holland version is superior to the Sunflower version, which does have beautiful background vocals, but overall I love this sort of rootsy production, this arrangement over here with the harmonica and that whole mood, and that how it sort of, it just fits this album so well. I couldn't imagine the Sunflower version being here at all. It just wouldn't fit at all in the Holland. So, you know, and they changed the rhythm to this. It's basically a waltz, so it's very pretty, and yeah, just a sort of like a folk song. And this album has a very folksy sort of vibe anyway, so it just fits really well. It flows perfectly into Beaks of Eagles, which is based on a Robinson Jeffers poem, which Al was a big fan of, and he added these sort of sung-in parts, or these parts that well, Mike goes through with the sort of the first verse of the poem at the beginning, and then we have this first song part, and then Al comes back in to go through with the sort of the second verse, and then there's another song part, and then there's the last part, and you know, a little bit more singing. But anyway, like, it's just an epic poem. I love the way the words describe sort of this life of eagle, and how sort of people change the environment, and it's a very environmental thing, you know, and it has sort of economical themes and stuff. It's kind of very ambitious and dark, and I love the music that Al wrote for it, the flute parts and that whole thing. It just sets this almost otherworldly historical mood. I don't know, it's very hard to describe it, because as I mentioned, you cannot really play it separately. It only works within the context of this California Saga trilogy over here. But I love the way it segues at the end to I'm on my way to sunny California, and so you have that extremely beautiful, sweet, that sort of sad, melancholic flute thing going on, and then it sort of dissolves, and then you get that bouncy, that rhythm, dun, 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 and then Brian's youthful voice, which is, it's basically the last appearance as a lead vocal on a Beach Boys album. You hear last time Brian's youthful voice, sort of the same voice that he had in the early 60s, singing I'm on my way to sunny California. Like, it's almost a sort of self-reflection, I don't know what that word is, like, it's sort of ironic in a way, you know, it has that sort of self-reflectionist, or I don't know how to say that, but you know, like, it's almost like there was a reason why Brian sang that part, and there's like a reason why things went the way they did, and this is right around that time that Brian infamously went to bed for 3 years, so that's like right there at the end of that, you know, period where Brian still was active and recorded stuff and worked on music, and then he sort of went recluse and came back then a few years later with 15 Big Ones, and his appearance and voice and everything had changed. So there's just something very bittersweet about his appearance over here. But anyway, the song California itself, the last part of the California Saga, is phenomenal. It's basically just a very sort of folksy 3-chord song, like a traditional Al Jardine song. So, you know, the composition is not complex, but the vocal parts and the whole arrangement is super interesting. It's one of my favorite productions on any Beach Boys album, really. And I wish that they had followed this sort of path more. Like, you know, can you imagine there being like a Holland Part 2, you know, whatever that would be called. But it would have been so great, because in this song, well, it starts off with like, you got that bass drum, that kick drum, and then you got banjo, and then comes in this Moog synth. It's like brown, brown, brown. It's like, what is this? And then on top of that, all of that, you got the amazing Beach Boys vocals. So it's like, it's so unique. There's really nothing like that. It's very quirky and in very much Brian. So Brian must have had a hand in that, even more than just the delivering that little vocal snippet, because it just is very much Brian Wilson. So, you know, it doesn't really sound that much like what Al was doing even around this time, like the other stuff. But anyway, like, yeah, I love that track, and it should have been a bigger hit once again. It kind of steals the bass line from California Girls. It has that cowboy thing. But anyway, I love the track, I love the lyrics, and yeah. And to me, that song is kind of a sad song. So, you know, even though it's a bouncy, sort of happy beat, it has a sad feeling, and so somehow it has this sort of subtext. I don't know, somehow this sort of sadness in it too. But anyway, that's the end of side A, and side B or side 2 starts off with The Traitor, which is the Carl Wilson track of the album, words written by Jack Rieley. And The Traitor is a famous Carl Wilson song. A lot of people even say it's the best song that he ever wrote. I don't know if I agree with that, but anyway, I love the track. It's very unusual thematically for really any white rock and roll groups, or rock and roll groups anyway. Like, nobody was writing songs about the natives and the treatment and, you know, that history, the brutality. And I think Jack really nailed the lyrics over here, and Carl really nailed the delivery, which is super important in this one. It just feels so honest and pure, and it's kind of interesting how the first part starts very upbeat, and it's sort of the first super sort of a song that sounds just super upbeat and happy, right up until the moment you start to actually listen to the lyrics and what the song is actually about. And then we get that second part of the song, which is kind of almost like a different song altogether, but it's just sort of, it puts everything into perspective and brings everything together. I think it just works really well. It's a very progressive composition, very unusual. It doesn't have that sort of verse, chorus, verse, structure, bridge. You know, it doesn't have that at all. It's very interesting. And like I mentioned, Jack Rieley's lyrics just phenomenal. And that whole thematics thing, like what the song is about in itself, is so unusual for any rock and roll group, at least around this time period. Nobody was singing or writing songs about this subject matter. So it's very, I don't know, it's just very bold, I guess, could be said. You know, it's just very forward-looking in a way. Even though it is about history, but as I mentioned, like, nobody was writing songs about these things. At least no major artist. So it was very uncool around that time period. And risky. But anyway, a great freaking song, a great song. Which is then followed with Blondie and Ricky Tune, Leaving This Town, which is one of my favorites. Once again, on the album. I mean, this album does not just have a single bad song, but Leaving This Town is probably the most progressive track that the Beach Boys ever recorded. And this one actually has a collaboration by Mike too. I'm not sure if Al is listed. No, it's just Mike. Yeah, I think Mike added some lyrics or something. Anyway, I love the solo part. On the studio version you got that synth solo, and on the live version you got a keyboard, or I think it's an organ solo. And then on the Sail on Sailor box set they released a live version that has a guitar solo. So you got like 3 different versions of this song to listen to, and I love that. That solo part is my favorite, and I wish that it would go on for like 5 minutes. I have to tell a little personal story with me and this song. It's very personal for me. Once in my life, it was over 10 years ago, I don't know, 12 years ago or something, 15 years ago, I don't know, time flies by so fast. Anyway, I was in the Finnish Defense Forces, so like military, and it's mandatory. You don't really choose whether you go there or not, we just gonna have to go there. And anyway, I was at this secluded place, base, like a military base, and I couldn't really sleep there, at least for the first few weeks, and I just kept listening this album whenever I had that little snippet of time to, you know, free time. It was like an hour or 2 at the evening before you go to bed. So anyway, I had this downloaded to my phone. I don't think it wasn't even a smartphone, or but it was a phone with an internet connection. But anyway, I had it downloaded on the phone, and so I kept listening to it in my bed, and especially this song, "Leaving This Town," just somehow hit me very personally over there, because I just really felt the lyrics. I thought they were almost like about me, and I think that's something that a lot of people, that's probably what people usually when they talk about this song or that song is super important to me or whatnot. I think that's probably the feeling that they get or have gotten in some point in their lives, that they feel like, oh, that's about me. But personally, a lot of times I don't really get that. So, a lot of times I don't really care about the lyrics, whether it's the Beach Boys or any other group. I don't really pay that much attention even to the lyrics. I just listen to the music itself, the melodies and stuff like that. But this time with this song, it just hit me super personally, and I still remember that feeling. It really helped me through that time period in my life, because it really felt like it was about me. And so yeah, I love it. I love that song. I realized that not everybody likes that song because it's lengthy. It doesn't really sound like the Beach Boys at all. Especially that long solo part that just goes on for like 2 minutes. It's very unusual for the Beach Boys, but I love it. And yeah, this track is then followed with another Dennis Wilson classic, "Only With You," and this track is the only nitpick that I have about this album. The only criticism that I can really give about this album is this song. And not really that the song is bad or anything like that. I love the song. It's one of the most beautiful love songs that I've ever heard. I'd even put it almost up there with like "Forever" and "God Only Knows" and the other classics by this group. But my problem with this song and this album is that it's the first and the only song on the whole album that does not talk about boats, oceans, seas, traveling overseas, and water. So this album has this sort of big theme about traveling overseas. It is carried through in every song. And even Funky Pretty, the last album, the next song on this album, mentions silent night in the sea. So, every song has the sea element or water or traveling, going to another town, leaving this town, So, steamboats and stuff like that, Sail on Sailor. Like, this album is this big concept album. But then it has this one song, "Only With You," which is just a kind of like a little love song, which it doesn't ruin the album or anything like that, but it's kind of like, whoa, where did this come from? It doesn't fit the rest of the material at all. Though musically it fits perfectly well, and that's really the only reason why it isn't really a criticism for me, because if you don't pay attention to the lyrics, it flows really well. This album flows extremely well. I'd put it up there with like Pet Sounds, with the way it flows. It just flows so freaking well. But anyway, like that's my only little like nitpick criticism. But anyway, it's just such a beautiful song. Carl Wilson sings it. Dennis did a version of it in the Bamboo Sessions or Pacific Ocean Blue Sessions. I'm not sure which one, but anyway, with his gruffer voice, and that's very pretty too. But I think you kind of get the best version on I think it's on the Carnegie Hall show, where you get basically this version played live, but you got Dennis coming at the tag with his soulful voice. So you basically have the best of the two versions together in that live version. So, check that out if you love this song. But anyway, then the album ends off with Funky Pretty. And yes, it actually does end off with Funky Pretty, even though in the streaming platforms and on the CDs, after that you still got the Fairy Tale. But originally it was a separate thing included, I think it was like taped on the cover. So it was like this bonus thing that you got. It's not part of the album itself, and that's why I'm not going to review it in this video. I'm probably gonna do soon, hopefully sooner than later, a separate review of that one, the Brian Wilson Fairy Tale thing. But anyway, I'm not gonna talk about it here because Funky Pretty ends this album. And Funky Pretty is a classic, grandiose Brian Wilson track in like every way. Even though the production is very unusual, it's not, your Smile Pet Sounds thing, but it is very Brian Wilson. and that whole song, the way it's composed, and it's somehow just, it's the perfect closer for the album, because it brings everybody together. Everybody sort of have their spots, their vocal spots. Everybody is delivering lines, and Brian is playing the drums. So it's just this beautiful collaboration with the whole group, and it's so groovy. I love the title of the track, and the whole track is so groovy. It's so funky, really. I mean, it's not funk music, but it just has that sort of vibe, that very sort of cool, chill vibe. Really interesting. And Blondie sings so soulfully at the end, that tag part, and Mike's lyrics great. I'm not sure what Mike wrote and what Jack Rieley wrote, but you can kind of I don't know, I think you can kind of sense some of those Mike Love things over there, like Pisces Lady, like that's really like a Mike Love thing, you know. But I mean, I think it's just a great collaboration between the whole group, and you know, the live version, which is completely different. It's much more harder rocking, driving drums, and you know, edgier. Is great too. So I don't. It's very different from this one. So but I love the production style of the studio version too. So I cannot really decide which one I like the best. But I love both versions. The live version, the hard rocking live version, and this one too. So both are great. And it's just a great closure. And I love it how this album starts off with a Brian Wilson track and ends off with a Brian Wilson track. And both kind of, the first sound that you sort of hear is Blondie's voice, and the last sound that you sort of hear over here is Blondie singing that tag part. So it's sort of, it just comes, everything comes together, and it's in a way, like the whole album is just so phenomenal. Listen, from start to finish, it flows perfectly. I think it's paced perfectly. And if you exclude Only With You, you know, that's the only track that doesn't carry that sort of that main theme of the album. So you know, in a lot of ways, it is a concept album, and a great one, and one of the best by the Beach Boys, even objectively, even if it's my favorite, at least today. Objectively, it is a great album, and I wish it was more well known, and I wish that the story of Holland was more documented, because it's really not. Even all the biographies, not to mention the documentaries, they all just kind of gloss over it. There might be like a chapter in a biography talking about it, but there's never really, you know, not that much about it. Like, I would love to know the little stories behind it. What happened when they were recording Leaving This Town? What happened on the day that they were recording the backing tracks of California Saga? Like, I would love to hear Mike talking more about the writing of that song, Big Sur. Like, there's so many stories untold still. Or Funky Pretty, what's the inspiration behind that? Or, you know, even with the most well-known track of this album, Sail on Sailor, we still kind of are guessing who wrote what and how did the song come around, and is there a sort of hidden or lost Dennis Wilson lead vocal somewhere or not. Like, even though I think that's debunked, I think they taped over the anyway, like, Dennis was going to sing the lead on Sailor, and he tried it, I don't know, a few times. But he didn't really like the way it was, his voice or his singing was going, so Carl erased or taped over that one, then the Blondie's lead vocal. That's I think that's the official version these days. But anyway, like, there are so many of these sort of myths and stories that we don't really know if it's true or not. Like Brian. Some people say that Brian didn't enjoy the Holland trip at all, but then some people say that Brian was actually very healthy there, and he was bicycling and taking care of his kids and you know, writing songs to the fairy tale and working on that very eagerly. And Brian himself has said in the later years that he really loved the trip to Holland, and he thinks that this album is one of the best that they did. So, like, you know, who knows what is true and what is not. And yeah, so anyway, I think anyway, I have to end this, otherwise I'm just gonna ramble for hours and hours. So thanks for watching. What do you think about Holland? Write down a comment and let's continue over there. So anyway, thanks for watching. See you hopefully soon again. Take care. Bye bye.